Hi, I'm Amy, and this is A Star Reads, and today I'm going to do my March and April nonfiction review. It's taken me a while. It's been really busy, so please be patient with me. I'm really in June, I'm planning on reading a lot, doing a whole bunch of videos, hopefully vlogging a lot, but at the moment I'm just trying to make it through the quarter. So I thought, since I'm out here taking Cece for a walk and there's Isaac creeping, I figured this would be a good time to talk about my March and April nonfiction books. So in March, I actually read 3 nonfiction books. It was a pretty good nonfiction month for me. And then April, I only read 1, which was a middle grade nonfiction. So I'm going to go over those in the order that I read them in. And if I don't remember all the details as far as the names of the authors, because I'm sort of out here in the woods, I'm going to be putting the books on the screen so you'll have all that information. So the first book I read was Erebus, The Story of a Ship by Michael Palin. And this was a historical nonfiction book about the ship Erebus, and basically talks about the point when the Erebus is created all the way through to the point where it goes missing. And I was really interested in reading this one because Michael Palin is from Monty Python and the Flying Circus, and I was a really big fan of his, especially in Holy Grail. And so I was curious to see what this comedian was going to bring to a nonfiction historical book. But apparently he actually does PBS specials, or at least he did in the past, in the footsteps of this famous person or this famous voyage, or in the footsteps of that literary character. So that's our wood pile. Sorry, it looks kind of weird, huh? Like a beaver dam. Anyways, so I was really curious if he would bring a whole bunch of comedy to it, and I didn't realize that he actually does a lot of research on history and follows in the footsteps of these famous people. So that was kind of exciting to learn about him, because I'm a fan of Michael Palin. This was a period of imperialism that war had finished between France and England, but there was still this war among the different big powers in the world to be the first to come to scientific revelations, because technology was increasing. Everybody was wanting to be the first, especially in exploration. A lot of naturalists going out and bringing specimens back home and discovering new things. So the magnetic poles are a big part of this book, because that is one of the things that these ships were being used to search for. But there was also a hope to find a passage from the Atlantic Ocean through the Arctic Circle into the Pacific Ocean, because it would have been, better for shipping. There would have been a lot of money that you could make from finding a passage that was a lot easier than trying to go all the way around South America, the Cape. What is the Cape down there? All that is to say that the beginning of this story is a buildup of the history of these explorers and trying to understand where they are as far as looking for magnetic north, magnetic south, and then how Erebus plays a role in that. So then after that, you follow Erebus on this big trip to Antarctica. And this is probably the most detailed part of the story, because there was a ton of ship records, but there was also a lot of journals from the people who were on the ship. Not just from the physicians and captains, but there were also letters and notes and stuff from some of the lower ranking crew. So it was really cool, and that part of the book was probably the most interesting and most exciting, and I really enjoyed the Antarctica voyage. Finally, the last part of the book is where they take the trip up to the Arctic Circle to try and find the Northwest Passage, and this is where the ship gets stuck. Spoiler alert, but it's a nonfiction book, so that's already one of the things that's well known about the Erebus. And this part of the book is not as well fleshed out because there are no records. They don't have the records. They're trying to discover what happened to the Erebus. So that's basically where the story ends off. So actually it starts out in the current time, the present time, and ends off in the present time, because they're trying to search for the remains of the Erebus. And so I say spoiler alert, but from the very beginning of the story that the Erebus sinks and that they're searching for the ruins. So ultimately, I think I gave this book a 3.75. I enjoyed the Antarctica section the most. The first part was really slow moving, and honestly, I didn't feel it was really necessary for me to understand all the back history to enjoy the book, as well as to enjoy the trajectory and the intentions behind the trip. And this was a common complaint in my book club, that the first third of it was unnecessary and just not that interesting, or at least not as interesting as the rest of the book. So I think that a lot of people did downgrade their rating for it because of that first section of the book. And all that part is really not on the Erebus. So once you actually are on the Erebus, you're learning about the actual voyages the Erebus is taking. That's when this book really takes off and is really fun and enjoyable. I will say that there is conversations around imperialism. Michael Palin definitely points out some of the really crappy things these men did. The men were pompous and full of themselves and thought that they knew best for the world and that they were discovering things. Obviously, they weren't discovering things. There were many indigenous people who had lived in the places that they approached. They were not actually discovering things. And of course, there was this idea of, if this land is not being used for its best purpose, then it's being wasted, which was a very imperialistic ideal. If you're not using it for progress and resources, then it's wasted land, or you are lacking in the knowledge of what is possible, which just was ridiculous, right? Which was interesting, and all those things were pointed out in the book. So ultimately, you get a very good idea of how imperialism worked during this time, who the key players were, and what was happening on Erebus. I had to take a break because my arm was about to fall off. So the second book that I read was Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. This is a book that looks at intersectionality when it comes to feminism, and also how modern day feminism is not representing all the women of this country. It's not representing women of different identities, women who have different social and economic needs, and it doesn't cover causes that are inclusive. And so this was a really important book that I was looking forward to. I was hugely looking forward to this. And in a couple of ways, it didn't really hit the mark for me. I didn't actually rate this book because I want to read it again. And I understand this is a book that everybody loved so much. And I was so looking forward to it that I don't know if it just didn't end up being a book I loved because I put so much pressure on it. The things that I really liked about this book is that it's a topic that needs to be discussed. And it's a topic that feminists, women who consider themselves feminists, should be reading about, because there's this concept of what a feminist is, and that is such a narrow view, and if we stay within those bounds, we are going to be not only misrepresenting all feminists, but also leaving out important people to the feminist cause and different feminist causes. There needs to be a readjustment of what the focus of feminism is. So I really loved Mikki Kendall's arguments and the thoughts that she had as to why feminism is so problematic. And she takes this book and she breaks it up into sections, and each section she talks about a different cause or a different focus that's important to intersectional feminists that is not important to modern feminism. And Kendall's angry, rightfully so. She's angry that there's so much hypocrisy and that we're looking to make a difference, but only for a select few. And not only a select few, but the people who are already very privileged, the women that are already very privileged in other ways, in their other identities. And so this was a great way to get onto this subject and to learn more about it and to feel empowered that there are ways that we need to look at feminism that can be changed and that we can improve ourselves as white feminists, to use our privilege to give voice to all feminists of every identity, and to also look at the causes that we champion. Should we be focusing on things that are only going to affect middle class or upper class white women? I really appreciated that. The areas that I had difficulty with is that I felt that the focus of this book wasn't quite clear to me. And maybe that's because I was told later on, or I read later on, that this was actually in essays. There were like separate essays. I didn't realize that going into this for some reason. And so the writing all seemed kind of jumbled, and it didn't seem like the sections were very clearly defined for me. I felt like there were a lot of bleed over from other sections, and so it didn't make the individual sections as powerful, in my opinion. And then also I felt it was kind of jargon heavy. I know that she got her degree in sociology, and I think it's great, and I think it shows the research that she has done as well as the knowledge that she has on this subject. However, if this book is looking to capture the audience that I think she's intending to capture, some of the jargon heavy points were a little confusing. And so for everybody to understand exactly what she's talking about, it would be nice to have a little more definition within each section. And I know that seems like a lot of extra work. However, since this feels like sort of an introductory book on this subject, I feel like it would have been appropriate to give a little more definition to those concepts that were a little less commonly used. And the last thing that I kind of had a little bit of an issue with was the intention behind the book, meaning there were moments where it said, this is going to be really uncomfortable for you to read, and she took on more of an activist slant, and I thought that that was great. Tell me exactly why you're upset, what needs to be known, why I need to come to terms with this. I was prepared for her to be really angry, and it didn't come across that way. And then there were other sections where it was very scholarly, and I was like, okay, if you're gonna make it more scholarly, then we need more citations, and then make the whole book more scholarly. And then there were other sections that were really anecdotal, and I liked the anecdotal elements to it. I really love nonfiction books that are anecdotal. So at times I felt like this book was either very anecdotal, scholarly, or activist driven, and kind of wanted the book to either take one of those viewpoints and push it a little harder or blend them a little better. I understand the importance. I feel it is very important. However, I wanted a little more cohesion, or I wanted a little something different from this. And maybe because I didn't read it as individual essays, maybe that's where I had a problem. So I think at some point, knowing that, I'll go back and reread this book. And then I'm also going to read other books on this similar subject and then give a better idea as to how I actually feel afterwards. This is a subject that is incredibly important. I feel everybody, no matter if you're feminist or not, should read this book or read books like this. Do your research. We need to understand the impact we can all have as individuals, and also how to be good advocates, because advocates do the work. Advocates make a difference, and advocates are the ones that use their privilege to lift up voices that need to be heard. You're hanging out in a tree now, so if it's bouncy, there is one branch that's hanging down low, and I'm using it for my phone. So the final book I want to talk about for March is Einstein's Cosmos by Michio Kaku, and I gave this one 5 stars. I loved this book. I just couldn't help it. I have been craving science nonfiction for a while. It's one of my favorite genres, especially when it comes to the nonfiction realm. And this was fantastic. I really loved the way, it was a short book, it wasn't that long. And Michio Kaku did such an amazing job of taking information on Einstein's life and consolidating it in a way that not only did it not feel too jumbled and too compact, but it also felt very accessible. There was so much that he was explaining that was so complex that most people don't, even scientists don't understand the material that he's talking about. And yet I felt he explained it in the most accessible way, and I was so impressed. I was so impressed. I also really loved the history of Einstein. He goes a bit into his personal life. He doesn't go too into depth because he only can really talk about what he knows and what he's read about and what kind of research he's done. But it talks about Einstein from a child all the way up to the point where he dies, and then even beyond him, you know, kind of where his work has gone. And you learn about where he came from, who he is, why he became this physicist, and what his passions and desires were. He began by having inspirations from people like Newton. He took Newton's mechanics and he built on that form of physics, which is, you know, the things we see around us. And then he built from mechanics onto relativity, which was the concept of time and the concept of light speed, because all of the rules when it comes to that form of physics are completely different than the rules of mechanics, of the physics we see on Earth. And then ultimately in the end, he got really hung up on the concept of quantum physics, atomic level physics, which is also very oddly, strangely different from the other forms of physics. The thing about Einstein, the thing that was most interesting about him was that the reason he was so successful in physics was because he was able to picture all these scenarios, which made it so that he not only could explain it better, but he also had many aha moments when he was able to picture these moments. My cat is whining. What is going on, Isaac? He's like, I'm ready to go in. Let's go, guys. No, we're not done. All that is to say that I loved this book. In the end, Kaku goes in this explanation of string theory, which is this incredibly complex, almost feels like it's a faith-driven form of science, because it just is so out there and nobody really understands it, and there's really only math to support it at the moment. So very complicated. And yet I felt like I had a little more of an understanding of it. So I'm also going to be reading another Michio Kaku in June, I think next month. So I'm really excited about that, to see if I just really love the way he writes and the way he expresses himself scientifically, or if it was a one-off and I just loved Einstein's Cosmos. I'm going to stay here because my arms are free and they're not hurting anymore, and my phone has not fallen yet. So the last nonfiction book I'm going to talk about is the one I read in April, Katherine Johnson's Reaching for the Moon. Katherine Johnson is the woman who, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures or read the book Hidden Figures, she's one of the women who was the mathematician for NASA, and she helped to do all the mathematical equations that put the first man on the moon. This was a middle grade nonfiction. I was really excited to read it because, you know, I will be teaching younger kids, and I feel like I want books like this in my classroom, books of people from different backgrounds who have different experiences, from different identities, who played huge roles in history that we don't learn about in school. I can't remember what I rated it right now. I think it was in the 4-star range. I'll put a number up here somewhere. So this book is all about Katherine Johnson's life from when she was a child all the way through to her 90s. And she actually passed away last year, 2020, on my birthday. I think also she lived into her hundreds. So incredible woman, incredible life. She talks a lot about Jim Crow and segregation and the periods of history. Women, especially women of color, had so much less opportunity, and yet because of her own fortitude and what her family instilled in her, she always knew that she could be whatever she wanted to be, and she didn't let anything stop her. It's incredible. And she also knew the privileges that she had herself because of her family, but then she was able to look at the impact she could bring and try and make this difference. She was really strong into education. She was a teacher for a very long time, and yet she continued to strive towards her goals of being a mathematic researcher and getting the job in NASA, which at the time was NACA. She just did incredible things, and she didn't let anything stop her, and she pushed boundaries. I love the way she wrote this story because this is a great example of how this kind of history can be taught to children and should be taught to children. And people who say, oh, it's too ugly of a history, or it's such a sad period of time, or some of these things are kids shouldn't be exposed to, is complete BS. Because Katherine Johnson was able to explain really difficult parts of history without sugarcoating anything, but also making it appropriate for a young audience and making them understand what our history is. We need to be able to accept the past in order to move forward, in order to make it better and not continue doing the same thing over and over again. So I love this book for that. I will have a copy of this in my class. I will probably create a whole curriculum around this book. It's really impressive, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, just for information, it's a wonderful look at a very important woman in history. There were parts of it that were a little slower moving, and I'm not sure how much children would be engaged in moments, but I think that those are still learning moments that we could discuss, especially if they get a little confused or caught up. And if you as adults want to know more about Katherine Johnson, I thought this was a great look into her life. You get a lot of details, you get a lot of understanding of her experiences and some of the challenges she faced. She had a lot of heartache. She had a lot of heartache in her life, but she never let it stop her. She was incredible. And so those are my 4 nonfiction books. I'm sorry it's taken so long and that I didn't get my March ones done sooner, but they're here now, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe now so you can see more of my nature. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.